Is Silksong the Dark Souls 2 of Hollow Knight? That's the question for today's video. As ever since I played Silksong when it released last year, I felt this eerie similarity, whether that's the gameplay, the hype before the release, and even how it compares to its predecessor. And in the year Silksong's been released, I've hardly seen any comparison videos, so today I'm going to take a deeper look and find out for myself, is Silksong an improvement on Hollow Knight, or did it fail and replay the events of Dark Souls 2 all over again? For you to understand what I mean, let's take you back to when the Souls-like genre began. Dark Souls 1 released globally on October 7th, 2011 and was the Souls title that started the whole genre. Well actually, Demon Souls came out before it, released in 2009, but at the time FromSoftware wasn't as big as it is nowadays. It was only known in Japan, leading to Demon Souls being poorly marketed in the West. But building up to the time of Dark Souls 1's release, Demon Souls fans had a strong cult-like reputation due to the defense of the game's brutal but rewarding difficulty, generating even more hype for its successor. And then Dark Souls 1 released, with an even bigger starting audience, but it didn't always have the well-rounded reception it has today. The players were split, some saying the game was clunky, impossible and unfair, while others say it was challenging, but also felt rewarding. Little did FromSoftware know, this split reception they got gave them even more publicity. After players got used to the difficulty, they started to realise that there was more to the game than just hard boss fights. The atmosphere, the world design, and the sense of discovery were highly praised, as it was different to all the mainstream games at the time. They rejected colourful and family friendly and replaced it with beautiful dark gothic scenery. They ditched the idea of a linear story and made one of the biggest foundations for open worlds with a map with no set path and interconnected routes. And most of all, they threw away the idea of playing a power fantasy and made the players struggle. Dark Souls 1 became the first mainstream game of its genre, and fans were excited to see what FromSoftware can cook up for its upcoming sequel, Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 was released in 2014, just 3 years after Dark Souls 1, and due to the success of its predecessor, Dark Souls 2 had enormous expectations. Surprisingly, when it was released, many critics gave it high praises due to its improved combat, multiplayer, and its increased accessibility, as all platforms received the game within a month of each other, whereas Dark Souls 1 took over a year to release on PC. But the fans were once again divided. Players often criticised the weak world design, the unfun bosses, and the solution the game had for artificial difficulty, the gank fights. If you don't know what gank means, it was the combination of the words gang and kill coined by MMO players in the 90s to refer to a group of players ganging up and ambushing another player. This term spread to more games like League of Legends and For Honor, making it a universal term for when a player gets outnumbered. Anyways, back to Dark Souls 2, many players were disappointed with this common occurrence with recycled bosses and minions surrounding them, as they saw it as lazy game design. And this wasn't just one occurrence. Multiple bosses were poorly designed with 1 or 2 attacks, and the devs just added multiple field enemies just to make it harder. But this didn't have the same rewarding feeling Dark Souls 1 had. It just felt tedious. More quality over quantity. But I haven't spoken about the biggest problem Dark Souls 2 has, and one of the reasons I'm making this video, the runbacks. If you thought ganking in boss fights broke the immersion, then the runbacks make the game feel like a chore. For me personally, I like bonfires being right outside the boss door so I can get straight to the fight over and over again until I learn the boss's moves and eventually beat it. But in this game, some bonfires can be over 5 minutes away from the boss fight just to go in and get wand. It turns the feelings of challenging into the feelings of frustration. Quite literally, if the runback is so far, it makes me want to get past it as fast as I can because the runback time adds up. Imagine playing Elden Ring and every time you fight Melania, you have to run down the whole Halig tree. People fight her hundreds of times and still don't beat her. But what I'm saying is, fighting a boss is enjoyable because I get to spend time learning it. Runbacks are literally just a waste of time. People were impressed with Dark Souls 2 only for the reasons every other sequel does, and those are the graphics, which improve the more time passes, and fixing the combat physics and the clunkiness. Well, I have to admit, FromSoft did listen to the players when improving that one. But they are the only improvements Dark Souls 2 has over Dark Souls 1. Think of it like this. If Dark Souls 1 had a modern remaster, most of its problems would be fixed, like the bad hitboxes, the slow inputs, not the fucking puzzle bosses, just keep them out. But the problems the game had due to it being the first of its kind. Whereas you look at Dark Souls 2, and all of its problems are fundamental to the game. It improves on where Dark Souls 1 lacked, but left out what made Dark Souls 1 great. Some say it's because Hidetaka Miyazaki, the director of Dark Souls 1, wasn't the primary director of Dark Souls 2. And I can see how that could be true, as he then came and made what some say is a true successor of Dark Souls 1, which is Dark Souls 3. I actually can't say that yet because I haven't played it. OGs know that I can't play it without doing my Dark Souls 2 playthrough yet. But it's taking a long time, it might not come out. But now that you know how Dark Souls 2 stands out compared to Dark Souls 1, is Silksong in a similar boat when it comes to Hollow Knight? Hollow Knight, The indie-made Metroidvania, released 24th of February 2017, had a slow start but gradually built up a decent fanbase due to its unique style, huge interconnected world, and difficult but rewarding combat. This sounds like I'm just repeating the start of Dark Souls again, but that's because Hollow Knight was heavily inspired by it, and also had a similar underdog to mainstream rise. It took the best parts from Dark Souls, like the checkpoints, the dark atmosphere, and the rewarding exploration, but also took the platforming elements from the old classics like Super Metroid and Castlevania, ultimately giving Hollow Knight its own identity. People started talking about it due to its amazing gameplay, while also just having the cheap price of £13, that's $15 for the Americans. But people were wondering how a game of such high quality was able to release with such a low price. Team Cherry, the developers of Hollow Knight, had a core team of only 3 people, and the fact that an indie development studio managed to rival games made by AAA studios only made the game more popular. After releasing multiple DLCs for free, Team Cherry managed to make the biggest mistake a game company could make. In 2019, they announced Silksong, the Hollow Knight sequel where you get to play as Hornet, a beloved character from the original. I don't know how it happened, but Silksong became one of the most anticipated sequels ever to exist. The hype for Silksong made Hollow Knight even more popular than it was, and the reason I decided to play Hollow Knight back in 2021 is because I saw memes about Silksong. But even though this sounds like a good thing for Team Cherry, how is a team of 3 people meant to make a game to live up to this overwhelming amount of pressure? Hollow Knight took over 2 years to develop, with several balance patches released. So when no word about Silksong was made in 2021, 2 years after its announcement, the fanbase started making memes joking about the time it's taken and the little amount of news Team Cherry was releasing. But at last, in June 2022, Silksong reappeared at the Xbox and Bethesda showcase, and the fans were as hyped as ever. Microsoft said that every game in the showcase would be releasing in a year, and everyone was excited, expecting Silksong to be released no later than June 2023. But in May 2023, Team Cherry officially delayed the game, saying that the development had become larger than expected. With the fans disappointed, they went back to doing the only thing they could do, and that was making memes. And make memes they did, all the way through 2023 and all the way through 2024. But in April 2025, the game appeared during a Nintendo Switch 2 Direct with a 2025 release window. You would have thought fans would be taking this with a grain of salt due to it being announced several times before, but fans were even more hyped than they were before. People who hadn't even played Hollow Knight were excited for the game due to the popularity being spread by all the memes. But in June the same year, more gameplay was released, and Team Cherry stood by the fact that it would release by Christmas. And in August, an official release date was announced. At this point, the game was the most anticipated game of the time, beating out Elder Scrolls 6, Half-Life 3, and only just contending with GTA 6 due to it being delayed in 2026. But on September 4th, 2025, Hollow Knight Silksong released. On day 1 it had over 580,000 concurrent players on Steam. Putting that in perspective, until this game's release, Hollow Knight had a steady 8 to 11,000 player count and only hit a peak of 95,000 at the start of September when people were preparing for Silksong. For a 3-man indie studio to be hitting these numbers were unheard of, and is an achievement I'm not sure an indie studio could do ever again. But when it comes to the actual game, somehow Team Cherry managed to deliver on this 6-year hype train. The game was received positively by most hardcore fans and critics, but the opinions of the more casual audience were more decisive when it comes to Silksong over its predecessor. Firstly, Silksong is a much harder game than the original, with many people thinking the early progression was brutal. They also thought that this was more complicated, with an even bigger and interconnected map than the first. But most of all, casual and hardcore players came to the agreement that checkpoints and runbacks were a complete downgrade. Many checkpoints were only available when paying for them with rosaries, but you'd lose them all when you died, and only a limited amount of enemies dropped them in the early game. So on a first playthrough, with little knowledge of the map and enemy drops, you could spend hours farming just to have the same security the first game offered for free. But even when you unlocked the benches, you couldn't escape the runbacks. There are a few runbacks that feel tedious to do, but I'm only going to be talking about 2, the Last Judge and Growl in Bottled. Firstly, the Last Judge is a major boss fight that opens up the area for Act 2, and in these types of games, an area final boss is often a skill check that prepares you for the difficulties to come, but the run back to the Last Judge is just so unneeded. It's a difficult boss fight anyways, but for someone's first time, it forces you to take minutes to run all the way back, but it's the resistance that makes it painful. The enemies in this area are hard to dodge, and some require you to wait and bait out attacks just to let you past, which wastes even more time. Sometimes games accidentally make a run back long, but for this you can tell it's intentional. But I'm pretty sure 90% of gamers don't like runbacks anyway. If you're watching this and you do like them, let me know in the comments. But I'm just not a fan of this time wasting artificial difficulty, but some hate Growl even more. Firstly, it hides the bench in a secret area that requires you to go in a poison water that nerfs your healing. You have to dodge a high amount of enemies that have attacks that follow your movement. And when you finally get to the boss, you have to clear wave after wave of field enemies just to fight the boss that's kinda mediocre. Silksong has its issues, and the more you think about them, the more you think about Dark Souls 2. But is Silksong truly a failure, just like how Dark Souls 2 failed the original? No, I don't think so. In my opinion, Hollow Knight Silksong is a truly great game, and it improves upon Hollow Knight so much. Its map is bigger, better, and more detailed. The already limited 2D combat was improved, and the bosses had such good designs, with them being choreographed so perfectly. When you get hit, you know it's just your fault. It takes what makes Hollow Knight good and improves it, whereas Dark Souls 2 takes the core Souls-like formula but makes it worse with lazy boss fights, artificial difficulty, and the linear maps Dark Souls 1 did so well to avoid. But I can see where the comparisons come from when comparing Silksong to Dark Souls 2, as I personally came straight from playing Dark Souls 2 in the summer of 2025 to playing Silksong on its release. They both have long run backs, but Silksong has far less. They both have gank fights, but in Silksong, most of them just work. It doesn't feel like an unfair mess. But most of all, Silksong managed to live up to the hype of its predecessor, whereas Dark Souls 2 became the sequel Dark Souls fans don't talk about. With the Silksong DLC coming out soon, I hope it carries on being great, and leaves out the things fans were critical of in the base game. But if you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, as it only takes 2 seconds and it helps me immensely. But let me know what other games you want me to talk about. I've been thinking about doing a video about the fall off of Night Rain, or even the rise of Deadlock, but that's all from me for now. And no, I'm not finishing my Dark Souls video.